some of the themes that people are bringing forward have to do with the current cultural moment, fear, despair, and anger either at oneself or those people who are creating my fear and despair. And I'm just wondering if you could say for yourself how practice relates to those things.
Yeah, I'll just say for myself, one of the hardest lessons to digest of practice is that I create my experience, not other people. I spent a summer kind of poking around in the Pali Canon, which is this vast collection of texts that are said to be very early texts, and many of them are very early. I was kind of poking around, trying to understand what the Buddha had to say about emotions. I didn't read every word, but I didn't find much. But he did say something about emotions at one point. He said, emotions, I'm paraphrasing slightly, emotions arise from intentions. So that stuck. Emotions arise from intentions. But even though it's stuck, I didn't understand at all what it meant. So I happened to be walking in Vienna not long after this with D.Master De Kwang, and we're walking along the street and we're talking about stuff. And I said, sir, you know, the Buddha said this, emotions arise from intentions. What are these intentions that he's talking about? And De Kwang said, I want, I don't want. So that made it really clear to me. Everything I experienced, the whole swirling realm of emotion arises from I want and I don't want. That's not my experience of emotion exactly. My experience of emotion is that they fall on my head from outer space. Somebody does, I'm driving on the highway, somebody pulls right in front of me, my finger comes up immediately, I'm outraged. You know, I don't get the I want and I don't want directly in that moment. But it's there, you know, when the heat cools down a little bit, I can see that I was actually afraid. Even though I felt angry, I was actually afraid. And underneath the fear is, I don't want to die. I want to live. It's right there. So when I kind of began putting that together in my own life, and this is over 10 years ago, first it was a very helpful analytical tool, and I'm not at all opposed to developing an analytical understanding of one's life. I think that's helpful. Personally, I found that very helpful. I began to see that I was responsible for my experience. And that was fabulous news, because if I'm responsible, that means it could be otherwise. And I'm in control of that. I'm in charge of that. You know, I'd like to blame Ken for my irritation, but actually, as irritating as Ken is, he's not responsible for my irritation. I'm responsible for my irritation. A more complete response to a mistake that we might make would be to say, Nick, I can see in your eyes that I've really hurt your feelings, that my language really hurt your feelings. First, I want to apologize for that. And second, I know that I have a problem. And I commit to working on this problem. And maybe even, and here are the exact things I'm going to do to work on this problem. And that's taking responsibility. The wonderful thing, you know, there's a wonderful interrelationship, I think, between Western psychotherapy and Zen practice. Western psychotherapy helps us really understand the painted lines, as well as the real cattle guards. And I personally, I appreciate having that information. My mother said this, I internalized that. It's caused me a problem for the last 70 years. Okay, great, that's good. Zen is important because in the moment when my mother's energy, which is still here, when my mother's energy starts to percolate up, I can say, oh, no thanks, Mom. You've been dead for some decades now. Go back to sleep. Now, I can do that maybe 20% of the time, but 20% is a lot. You know? Our lives are like giant ocean liners sailing across the Pacific Ocean. From Seattle, you're headed to Seoul. But shortly after you leave Puget Sound, the captain says, let's make a 1-degree course correction. Nobody in the boat feels the 1-degree course correction. It's so tiny. But by the time they get across the ocean, they're in Singapore, not Seoul. That's what the practice life is like. You may not notice anything happening at all. But you'll end up in a very different place. And boy, that's so precious, so precious.